On this episode of DBL's True Crime Chronicles, a madman with a gun is killing elected officials in Texas. The grisly case of a justice gone rogue. And later, a teenage girl's decades-old murder is solved. The piping hot evidence that finally thawed her cold case.
Welcome to DBL's True Crime Chronicles. I'm Sam Shocker. County prosecutors face evil every day, fighting their hardest to keep us and our cities safe from violent criminals. But in this Texas county, one man's mad crusade for revenge sent shockwaves through the local community and the entire country.
It's 8:50 a.m. on January 31st, 2013. Kaufman County Prosecutor Mark Hasse walks to court. Mark has prosecuted criminals in Kaufman for 3 years, and he has held a license to practice law since 1982. With decades of experience under his belt and several active criminal cases on his docket, he knows all too well the dangers of the job. Mark cuts through the parking lot of the Kaufman DMV, which sits across the street from the county courthouse. A fateful decision. Without warning, a masked man takes Mark by surprise, holding the prosecutor at gunpoint. The gunman is wearing a black Halloween mask and a bulletproof vest underneath a black jacket. He fires multiple rounds into Mark's chest, sending him to the ground. Mark begins to bleed out on the pavement. When the shots ring out, security places the courthouse on lockdown. Police are called to the scene, but arrive too late to catch the trigger man. Paramedics rush Mark to the hospital. He clings to life, but his wounds are too much to overcome. There's nothing doctors can do to save him. Prosecutor Mark Hasse, aged 57, has been killed in broad daylight. The brazenness of the shooter's tactics suggests to police that this murder was not a random killing. Authorities determined that the gunman targeted Mark specifically. Police launch an enormous manhunt for the killer.
We're going to pull you out of whatever hole you're in, and we're going to bring you back and let the people of Kaufman County prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law.
Their investigation leads them to examine Mark's past and present cases. Police follow leads that allege the Aryan Brotherhood, a prison gang, is responsible for Mark's murder.
We're very much on alert. We obviously have some folks that are out to do harm to elected officials, and so we take that very seriously in our jobs. I have great confidence that we're being protected in our courthouse today.
Defense attorneys in Kaufman speculate that local drug dens and crime rings and other white supremacist groups may be responsible too, citing Mark's history prosecuting such cases.
We see our job very seriously as protecting the people of Kaufman County from the scum that happens to come by and wants to rob and steal and pillage.
Theories circulate throughout the national press as everyone asks the same question: who had Mark killed?
We will not let this cower us. Texas is a law and order state, and we will track down and punish those who have committed this crime.
Ultimately, none of the leads amount to any arrests. After several months, lacking suspects, evidence, and any concrete leads in their investigation, it begins to look like Mark Hasse's murder may go unsolved. Some begin asking, will the masked gunman get away with it? However, as Easter arrives in the Dallas suburbs, another shooting diverts the attention of authorities away from Mark's murder, but not for long. This time, police find District Attorney and his wife, Mike and Cynthia McClelland, dead in their home. Mike McClelland had been an officer in the U.S. Army Reserve for 23 years and worked as a clinical psychologist before pursuing a legal career, eventually running a successful campaign for DA. Cynthia McClelland worked as a clinical psychologist for many years before becoming a psychiatric nurse at the local hospital. They shared 4 children. Mike is found with 16 gunshot wounds in his body. Cynthia is found with 8 gunshot wounds.
It's unnerving to the law enforcement community. It's unnerving to the community at large. We are taking precautions to protect other elected officials in the county.
The similarities between this double homicide and of Mark's, both of which had targeted high-ranking county officials, strikes fear into the community. Police give numerous elected officials throughout Kaufman County round-the-clock protection, and authorities visibly increase the security at the county courthouse. The similarities between the murders also give police their first solid lead in the case.
With 3 people dead in a county on lockdown, you won't believe who masterminded these heinous killings. Stay tuned for the unbelievable conclusion of the Kaufman murder cases when we return. Welcome back to DBL's True Crime Chronicles. Mike McClelland, Cynthia McClelland, and Mark Hass, they were the targets of one man's chilling, murderous fixation. A man who was out for revenge on his enemies, but you won't believe who that man turned out to be.
With Kaufman County on high alert and authorities on the hunt for a madman killing local officials, police get their first big break in the case. Eric Williams, a former Kaufman County judge, becomes a person of interest in the case. A friend of Eric's had called police after the McClelland murders to inform them that Eric had told him to rent out a storage unit in the friend's name. After searching the storage unit, which was stashed with Eric's possessions, police obtain a warrant to search Eric's house. There, they find the evidence that busts the case wide open. In Eric's possession, police find a live round of ammunition that they determine has cycled through the same gun that murdered Mark Hass and Mike and Cynthia McClelland. Police arrest Eric Williams and charge him with capital murder. Kim Williams, Eric's wife, is also charged as an accessory to the murders. With the pair in custody, the community's fears finally subside. After 3 long months of uncertainty, the case is finally put to rest. But what drove Eric and Kim to commit the murders? Kim agrees to cooperate with the DA's office in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony at Eric's trial paints a damning picture. Investigators begin unraveling the evidence obtained from Kim's confession, and a heinous motive begins to take shape. As a judge, Eric had been caught stealing county-owned computer monitors. He was booked for theft and prosecuted by Mark Hass and Mike McClelland. Those convictions cost Eric his elected justice of the peace bench, his law license, and his livelihood. Kim testifies that Eric became fixated on revenge. Admitting to having been a willing accomplice to the murders, Kim tells prosecutors that Eric always had a quick and terrifying temper. The former judge had once pulled a gun on a couple in a store parking lot after a disagreement, threatening to kill them. Kim also says that Eric would kill cats simply because he didn't like them. Kim confesses to driving their getaway car, but wasn't present for any of the murders. On the morning of Mark Hass's murder, Eric and Kim parked near Mark's usual spot. Eric was, according to his wife, in an unusually chipper mood. He was excited. He was ready to kill. After the murder, watching coverage of the killing that night, Kim said her husband was happy, even cocky. When Eric went to kill Mike McClelland, he wore a police officer's uniform with a badge to lower the McClelland's guard and allow him into their home. Wielding an assault rifle, Eric unleashed a torrent of lead, killing Mike. Kim recounts how Eric told her he killed Cynthia simply because she was a witness to the crime, calling her collateral damage. Kim says Eric had to shoot Cynthia an extra time because she was still moaning on the floor after he first shot her. The trial lasts 2 weeks, and after closing arguments, the verdict is swift. The jury finds Eric guilty on all counts. Just weeks later, Kim Williams pleads guilty, and for her cooperation, the court hands her down a sentence of 40 years. She divorces Eric, hoping to find redemption for her crimes. Kim will be eligible after serving 20 years behind bars, at which point she will be nearly 70 years old. Eric, however, receives harsher judgment. The judge sentences him to the maximum punishment allowable by the law, the same law that once guided Eric as a judge. He is sentenced to death. Having held court as a justice of the peace, handing down judgment to the criminals that passed through his courtroom, Eric Williams leaves that day a condemned man.
Since the trial, Eric Williams has filed numerous appeals to overturn his conviction and death sentence. However, they have all been thrown out by the courts. When we come back, we take an inside look into the trial that sent Williams to death row. I'm Sam Shocker. Welcome back to DBL's True Crime Chronicles. Eric Williams was a former judge whose murderous rage landed him on death row. Earlier, we caught up with a reporter who witnessed his trial. Take a look. We are joined by investigative reporter Tanya Iser from WFAA in Dallas, Texas. So, Tanya, thank you so much for joining us and bringing this story to light. How horrifying. How did police determine that Eric was responsible for the murders? What evidence did they have to charge him?
This is probably one of the most horrific and crazy cases I have ever covered in my career as a police reporter. The commonality here in the victims is that Mark Hassey and Mike McClelland had prosecuted Eric Williams for the theft of these county computers back when he was a justice of the peace. So everybody suspected Eric Williams, but the linchpin in terms of evidence was investigators found a Crime Stoppers tip number in Eric's home. That's a tip number that only the person that made that tip could have had. And when he made these tips, he said some things that only the killer could have known. And then the other key piece of evidence was a live round that had cycled through the weapon that had killed the McClellands that was found in a storage shed that Eric Williams had a friend rent secretly.
Well, speaking of Eric, he's on death row right now. Obviously, he's trying to appeal that process. Can you give us an update on what his status is, and how about his former wife, Kim? Like, what's going on with her?
Eric's been on death row now for 5.5 years. He's still in the process of appealing. It's going to the Court of Criminal Appeals now. Kim Williams has, got a 40-year sentence. She doesn't come up for even a parole hearing until 2033, and her release date is 2053, assuming that she is never granted parole.
Unbelievable. So here's the thing, Tanya. As you know, Eric has only given one jailhouse interview. What did he have to say about all of this?
Not surprisingly, Eric Williams continues to deny these killings. And having covered this whole case and watched him in the trial, that really doesn't surprise me. It was very clear when this 12-member jury found him guilty and then sentenced him to the death penalty that he was surprised. I think he really thought he was going to get away with it.
Yeah, from what I know about the story, too, he just seems like a pure narcissist, and I really hope that justice will continue to be served. Tanya, thank you so much. And to all of our DBL viewers, to read more on this case, visit first WFAA.com. You can also listen to the podcast episode, Eric Williams' Murder, which is out now. Just search True Crime Chronicles on your favorite podcast player. Thank you, Tanya. Eric Williams is currently in a Texas prison awaiting execution. Many murders go unsolved. Sometimes there's simply not enough evidence to investigate. No leads to follow, killers go free, and their victims find no justice. But in the case of this young woman, not even decades of time could prevent investigators from bringing her killer to justice.
Susan Eads is just 19 years old. She lives with her family in Seabrook, Texas, and works part-time at a local bar in town. On August 30th, 1983, Susan is seen leaving work late at night. She never makes it home. The next day, her body is found in an empty lot in Seabrook. Police determine that someone raped Susan, then strangled her to death with an article of her own clothing. As the investigation progresses, detectives procure a sketch of the man they believe is most responsible for the rape and murder. Known as Cowboy, the sketch depicts the suspect with a wide-brimmed hat, hair that falls over his ears, a mustache that hangs past the sides of his lips, a face with high cheekbones, and a pronounced chin. But despite an exhaustive investigation, police are unable to identify any suspects that fit the Cowboy's description. The case of her rape and murder begins to grow cold. Susan's family refuses to lose hope that her killer will be brought to justice. But nearly 4 decades later, with no answers or closure, their hope has worn thin. But it is not lost.
We have put together all kinds of scenarios for 35 years.
Detectives had spent the decades trying to identify the Cowboy, following lead after lead, all of which would ultimately fizzle out.
You get invested emotionally in these cases, emotionally in a good way.
But in 2018, investigators finally catch a break.
Hello? Hello?
Stay tuned for the shocking conclusion to Susan Eads' murder right after this. Welcome back. Susan Eads was living with her family in Seabrook, Texas, working part-time at a local bar. When she went missing, detectives struggled to crack her case for nearly 40 years. But in 2018, investigators finally caught the break they had been searching for.
Hello? Hello?
In 2018, Susan's mother begins receiving mysterious phone calls from an anonymous caller.
You have some pictures of her, you told me. I'd like to see them.
Just you, I ain't gonna show them to anyone else.
The calls shed new light and interest on the case, and shortly after, the DPS crime lab in Houston decides to retest old evidence.
It was not in bad condition, which is another reason why I think we were actually able to receive or obtain a DNA profile.
Using modern DNA identification technologies, the lab discovers DNA on the piece of clothing the Cowboy used to strangle Susan. With that one piece of DNA, detectives are now capable of building the suspect's profile.
It's kind of the equivalent of reading a book and 27% of the words are missing.
To complete their profile, investigators pass the evidence to genealogists, who spend the next several months comparing the DNA found on Susan's clothing to hundreds of thousands of online ancestry profiles. Finally, in May 2020, genealogists find a match. Using the DNA profile of a distant relative, investigators find that the DNA is a match for Arthur Davis. Sporting hair past his ears, a handlebar mustache, and high cheekbones, Arthur Davis is a perfect match for the Cowboy, the man police had spent nearly 40 years trying to identify. But as detectives start to track Arthur down to arrest him for Susan's rape and murder, they make an unfortunate discovery. Arthur Davis is dead. He died in a car accident 4 months after Susan's death in 1983, nearly 40 years prior to identifying him as the killer.
I won't say it's a hollow victory because it's an amazing victory, but it is a little disconcerting that he won't get his justice in this world.
No justice in this case. But for the family, they have something else.
Just some peace.
With that peace, however, comes more unanswered questions.
Somebody out there knows him. Somebody out there knows who he was and what he was about, especially at that time in August of 1983.
Although he has been posthumously brought to justice, Arthur's motives will forever remain unsolved.
We are joined by reporter Grace White from KHOU in Houston, Texas. So first and foremost, thank you for joining us, Grace. And here's the thing, the DNA names Arthur Davis as the killer. So please tell us, who was he, and any idea what his motive was?
We don't know the motive right now, but we do know Davis was 35 years old, a Vietnam vet, a fishing boat captain, and ironically, he was killed just a few months after Susan's murder from injuries he sustained in a car crash. So an interesting turn of events.
Now, Grace, there were other similar Texas cold cases in the 80s. Is there any chance that Arthur was connected to any of those?
That's what's so fascinating about this technology, the forensic genealogy that gave us Davis's DNA. They can now use that DNA to compare against other cold cases here in Texas, and we have a lot of them. So right now, there's no direct ties to any other cases, but that's definitely something they're looking at because of this breakthrough DNA.
Wow, I wonder if it's going to solve other cases. Unbelievable. So this is a big win for the Eads family, but it's not a closed case. So how can people still help?
They want to hear from people who knew Arthur Raymond Davis. They still want to know, how did he meet Susan Eads, and what was their relationship? There's still a lot of unknowns around this case. Of course, they want to answer the big question of motive, and they're asking anyone with information.
Thank you. Forward. Thank you, Grace, and I hope that they can find those answers for the peace of the family, for the victim and her legacy. We appreciate you, Grace. To learn more about this case, maybe one of the DBL Nation out there will have some sort of an answer. So please visit KHOU.com, and to listen to the new podcast episode that is out right now, just search "Strangled in Seabrook: Solving the Susan Eads Case" on your favorite podcast player. Susan would have turned 60 this year. I'm Sam Shocker, and this has been DBL's True Crime Chronicles. Thanks for watching.